Hello and welcome to altPOV.radio. Our guest today is Kim Trotman, and I'm always excited about all our shows, Kim. I have to tell you, we have such interesting people come on, and I've always wanted to talk about past life regressions and past lives and reincarnation, and I'll tell you a little bit about Kim. Kim, during her lifetime, ever since she was a child, she's experienced many profound paranormal events due to her intuitive nature and her work as a certified hypnotherapist and also as a certified past life hypnotherapist. In her practice as a counselor, she helps people to overcome phobias, remove negative energy, attachments, and reduce stress. She possesses both an intuitive and practical sensibility because her professional background, she had a professional background in civil engineering, and her father was a physicist, and with that influence, her family and her background have kept her grounded in a way that gives her a unique perspective on the paranormal. Kim's gifts have progressed over the years, as many psychics and intuitives do happen to them. That's the way it usually works. We're going to talk a little bit about our grandmother and her grandmother's influence on her. As her grandmother, that the intuitive gifts that she has runs on both sides of the family. And Kim has she's done a lot of different things, and she works with has developed her own gifts of seeing auras and spirits, as well as feeling and interpreting energy, and we'll get into that more when we do the interview. She also trained with psychiatrist Brian Weiss, author of Many Lives and Many Masters, in Austin, Texas, and during that time learned his methods of hypnotherapy and past life hypnotherapy and how to conduct successful regressions. And since then, she has learned a great deal about reincarnation and the journey of the soul through conducting past life regressions on her patients. Kim also is a frequent guest lecturer at Chapman University in Orange, California, and works with individuals and groups to pass on her knowledge and experience. And she's also, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, the acting vice president of CERO International.
Actually, the vice president of CERO, which is a support group that Yvonne Smith created to support abductees, but I'm on the board of advisors for the CERO International, where we put on speakers about, UFOs, abduction, that topic.
Great. Well, welcome to the show, Kim. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
I'm going to start today's show a little differently. I have to tell a story and I'm going to tell it to you and our listeners because this happened yesterday, and what's interesting is along the way, since we've been involved with, as you know, the Stan Romanek documentary and making that documentary, we've had some strange things happen to us. And one of the things yesterday morning, basically what happened is my wife had to go to work early, so it was about 6 o'clock in the morning, and she heard two female voices coming from my office. I was in bed sleeping, my son was sleeping, so she came in here, and this is where I do the show. So she came in, and as soon as she opened the door, she didn't hear anything anymore, so the voices stopped. But she looked at the computer was off. This microphone right here was also not plugged in, turned off, and there's nothing at all in my office that would make something like that happen. No radios, nothing like this, nothing to transmit anything like that. Well, about 6:50, my son woke up, and he also said he heard two women talking, and when he came in here, he says that it was coming from the microphone. So it was transmitting from the microphone, which was not plugged in any way, shape, or form.
Wow.
Then he went back outside, had breakfast, and while he was outside, heard two men's voices coming from my office. Came back in, same thing, literally emanating from the mic. Now, this is a mic I used to speak into in order to do interviews. This isn't a receiver. There shouldn't be anything coming out of the mic at all. And the reason I mention this story is because, Kim, a lot of what happened involved with Stan's case and all of that. The weirdest things would happen. There would be this in his house. This, like, for example, the stereo speakers would be turned off, and yet there would be a pulse sound coming out of it, a very weird sound coming out of the speakers.
Yeah.
Very strange. So I just wanted to mention that because it seems like it's ongoing ever since, again, we got involved with that alien abduction case. That we knew other people who had gotten involved, things would happen to them. So, and it's just, and you ask the question, well, am I being monitored? How could that happen? And I'm open-minded. There's all possibilities, right? So I'm not going to say for sure it was this or that, but it just seems to me that that's an electronic anomaly where nothing's on in a room, yet there's sound coming out of a device that's not plugged in.
Yeah. That's pretty weird. Pretty weird.
Very weird. So I just wanted to share that, and before we got started. So again, Kim, thanks for listening to that, and welcome to the show. Let's start with your childhood. Tell us about your childhood and how you first kind of knew you had intuitive abilities, and how that all kind of developed for you.
Well, my sister said I used to talk about people like, oh, they're green or they're blue or, that type of thing. And she said at one point I asked her what color I was. And she's like, white, I guess, like she didn't know what I was talking about. And there was like a family story, and I remember it so vividly, even though I was just a toddler. But my mom put me to bed. I still had my socks on, which was highly irregular. So I wanted to know what to do with them. And she told me take them off and just put them next to me. And so there I am, 2.5 or something, at this big responsibility. And she left, and I just was, getting ready to go to sleep. And I look up, and I called him a little wooden man, but a little man kind of popped up, seemed like he was there between, kind of just by the headboard, started walking towards the sock, and he grabbed one of them and twirled and started heading back. So I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm blowing it here. And so it was like telepathic. And I was thinking, what are you doing with my sock? And it was something like he needed it for some reason. And I just kind of grabbed at it because, and I just saw the sock kind of go whoosh, like it seemed to me like it went between the mattress and the headboard. So I got up at the rail, and I'm screaming bloody murder to get in there. We got to catch this guy. And my dad and mom came flying into the room, and I'm talking a mile a minute about this guy stole my sock and got to get him. And my dad just looked confused. He kind of had a weird look on his face. But my mom, I didn't know what it was at the time, but it was basically like a smirk or isn't that cute, So I was not happy, and I made him get me out. And we're looking at the end of the bed. My mom's kind of putting her hands in it, kind of, where the rails came down. And I, she was faking it. I knew it. And so I made him take the mattress out looking for the guy. And they couldn't find the sock. So it was always kind of, oh, Kim made her sock, or ha-ha. But, years later, when I got more interested in the abduction phenomena, and since kind of started realizing I had relation to that as well, I realized maybe that wasn't a little wooden man, it was probably like a screen memory or something. And I noticed also kind of a commonality in abductions were that a lot of times there's some anomaly in the memory that sticks with the person till they remember it, either under hypnosis or like a flashback or something. So I think that's what the sock was. It was just like a planting a seed there. And I don't know, I always just thought that it was intuitive. I just was naturally more intuitive, or I saw spirits or auras and ghosts and things. And then in hindsight now, I wonder if it's always that chicken or the egg. Is that where the contact came from? Or because I'm intuitive, or did I become intuitive because of the contact? I don't know.
Right.
Not sure either. But, in regards to the incident with the voices in the house, just a number of things were running through my mind. I have a friend that she's had breast cancer a couple of times, and she's also the one that I regress that wound up seeing aliens that got me to contact Yvonne Smith and how I got involved with the whole thing. But she would hear people talking in the other room, and it kind of started when the first time she had cancer. And she'd think her husband was watching TV, she'd go out and look, and nothing there. And it just happened recently, and I kind of had a sense it was like guides, but, whether it's ghosts or it's, UFOs, or there seems to be like an interdimensional quality to it. And I think sometimes just it's almost like you get exposed to somebody that has contact or has abilities, and then it kind of washes over, or your awareness opens up. And sometimes it seems like there's really specific attempts to get your attention. And I know we had Stan Romanek speak, and it's possible you were there, working on the documentary. It was at the military base, and
I was there.
Yeah, and I remember, real clearly, he's an interesting person and interesting aura. And that while we were booking that, Yvonne got called from her own phone number, and another person got called, and it was just, straight zeros, and then there was a weird, like, electronic sounding message. And so there was some of that same stuff going on that, was just weird.
Yeah, and it's just weird, really, how it just kind of how it happens. It's not necessarily even what's being said. It really, truthfully, is. How can that happen? Is it possible for something to? It seems like it's an advanced, very advanced, whatever is going on.
Yeah.
So,
and it's funny too, because it reminds me of, like doing readings. I kind of learned that because I would see the spirits and I'd be scared, and I got actually bothered. We had a haunted house, in Claremont. It's kind of like a Native American land, and I'd get my name called out of the closet or things like that that would scare me to death. I kind of learned to read other people's energy fields and, get information from people that have crossed over, or maybe guides, I don't know. But it comes in like more of a feeling and in your mind's eye, and sometimes, electronic things are affected, but I don't necessarily get like sentences and words. And with the UFO group versus, say, intuitives are a little more, kind of, I guess, ungrounded in a way. And a lot of the UFO people are more technical. I think that's why, in a way, I resonated with that crowd with my technical background. And, my sister's a lawyer, my brother's an engineer, and my dad worked with, clearances. He worked on a project called Project Jennifer in the Cold War, where they were pulling up a Russian submarine, off the ocean floor. And Howard Hughes was kind of masking it as mining, for nodules. And so there was, that whole technical aspect. So I did kind of resonate more with that. And then I also saw a UFO when I was 16 in Claremont, where I grew up. That's coincidentally also where Barbara Lamb lives. But yeah, I just was driving down Indian Hill Boulevard, and there's these tall eucalyptus trees that kind of just, branched over. And I was hearing a slight hum, and I was with a girlfriend, and I started looking around, we're trying to figure out what it is. And then I noticed up above, through the window, like above the tree canopies, a triangle craft. And it was going very slow, and it was just kind of like wobbling like that. And I could just see it through the tree canopy, and it wasn't really that far up, and it wasn't huge. I've heard people So my client's describing huge triangles, but it was just amazing. And we tried to kind of follow it, lost it over the treetops, and then we tried to call the police, and they basically laughed at us. And my family believed me. My dad basically worked in aerospace, so nothing really flies that way even now, except for maybe like a Harrier or a helicopter. It wasn't a helicopter. And I was doing that thing where you're running through, what is that? And nothing clicked. So, since then, I always believed in it, but that just cemented it for me. And that was just a few months before Travis Walton had his, experience, abduction. So, yeah, it definitely was on my radar, but I just thought, I was more involved with the paranormal. And
right. And how about, okay, I'm sorry, my mic cut off, so give me 1 second. Oh, gosh. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, thanks. Okay, sorry about that. How did you, when you mentioned on your site that you can interpret energies that you feel. Mm-hmm. And I was always curious as to how that worked. Like, so when you feel an energy, what do you feel? And then how do you interpret it?
Usually it feels kind of like almost like a vibration or something to me. And it's like a combination of things. And, weirdly, when people are hypnotized, it kind of works that way too. Like, they'll see things, they'll feel things, they'll know things. But when I'm doing a reading, and we all do it, we all read people, our energy field sticks out past us and we just overlap. And then, like at times we project over into other people's energy fields, like your kids, you'll sort of know like something's up, that type of thing. So, I've learned to kind of project into energy fields. Like if I'm reading a person, I can project out into people they know and pull information back. And I'll either get a sense of something else I'm familiar with, so I know it has to do with that same topic. Like, say I've had a different client that's husband was, abusive or something. I'll get that same kind of feeling, or I might even see that other client's, or feel his energy, feel the husband. Then I'll know that it's the same vibration, I suppose. And it's interesting because people that are just typical technical left brain type people, they'll tend to have blue in their aura. It'll be more blue, which is like a communication color to me, and it's intellect, and I'll know that they want to get the facts first. Even if they know something intuitively. I actually, in Chapman, I saw in medical students, blue with lavender, which is your intuition. They still want to get the facts, which I respect. I think that's a good trait. And I do kind of see more of that coloring on people that have contact. But if somebody's kind of running green, especially if they have green with yellow, they're very empathetic. They kind of work out of their heart and they feel more than they know, and orange tends to be very creative. If I see red in there or red shooting out, they're either pissed off or they got family issues. Kind of golds and whites are usually people that are pretty evolved and healing. Lavender too is very intuitive, and there's certain shades that I kind of tell me the person might get diagnosed with ADD or something, but that it really is more just that they know things ahead of time. They're intuitive. They know without doing all the research, and they're usually typically pretty intelligent and can like work with things three-dimensionally. So they're sort of shades that also give me information, and they'll change as people talk, but there's usually a kind of a predominant color. So it's kind of a combination of that.
Why do you think the colors? Why is that? Why is there a? Why can you, like, the colors represent emotion, right? Why do you think that is?
You know, it makes me think of, you know, the light spectrum is the same frequencies as our energy field, and I think that's what most people can see. And they kind of vibrate at different frequencies, you know, and even the wavelengths of the light are different. So I've like when I speak about Chapman and they talk about the energy fields and the chakras and energy centers, most people can feel the vibrations. They might not register what they're doing, but they can feel it. But I don't know if I see them as like something I'm being shown or I've developed because it gives me an instant visual to contain information about the person, or if it's actually there. But I have the sense that I can just see a little past what other people can typically see, although there's plenty of people that can see auras, and people can learn to see them. So it's something, when I'm running around, you know, like I'm late, I'm not noticing it. But when I'm sitting there talking to people for a while, all of a sudden they start lighting up.
Right.
So
you can train yourself to become more intuitive, or just more sharper at that. You can definitely become a better psychic intuitive by training, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's kind of like, you know, that if you believe it, you'll see it. Most people are the opposite, where they want proof or they want to see it, but their consciousness isn't open to that, so they miss what's right in front of them, or they don't pick up the information. Where once people have an experience, say their grandmother died, shows up at the foot of their bed, all of a sudden it's like, oh, then they'll start seeing stuff. Or, you know, like me, all of a sudden there's a UFO, or now in hindsight, a little man in my crib. You know, you start kind of putting the piece together going, huh, you know, there's probably something going on there.
Right.
And I have a healthy enough left brain to where when I was reading on aura colors, I thought, okay, I guess I should figure this out. A lot of them disagree with each other, and they spin this direction, they spin that direction. And I just found that it was kind of confusing, so I took the information in, but then I pretty much just let it go and paid attention to what I noticed seemed to work for me. And one thing I ran across was, even like if your chakras, which are your energy centers that run like here and your heart on down, this one person mentioned the right hand rule, and that made sense because I worked at Southern California Edison doing electrical drawings. And it's basically, if you point your right hand towards yourself, if copper wiring was coiled this way, energy would be flowing towards you this way. That seems to be the way the chakras run if they're running well. If, say, somebody had a broken heart or something, they might shut their chakra down, or they might run it backwards so that they're pushing energy out. It's not good for you. Eventually you'll get sick, you know, or something. You might have heart issues. Right. So it's good to keep it running, but it keeps you from experiencing the motion, you know, of it.
Right. That's fascinating. When did you decide to get into hypnotherapy?
I started doing readings. You know, I'd been doing them for friends, and I had started doing readings at this little place. It was kind of a goofy place called the Psychic Eye. My husband about had a heart attack when he said I was going to do that part-time, you know, and I was still doing the engineering drawings here. But, yeah, he's going to have to get a turban or something. But, so, turned out okay. But I had an experience right before I met him, when I was in my early 20s, where I got really paranoid about my neck. Like, And in hindsight, I'd had a lot of health issues in this area, like mumps, tonsils. My teeth came in late. I think my sister sucked all the good calcium out or something. She's not quite a year older than me.
Oh, okay.
But it just seemed like all sorts of stuff, thyroid, but I got this really bad phobia about being strangled. And it just seemed like it came out of nowhere. I had no reason to have it. And I, 6 months after that, I met my husband, went out with him for a while, and then I met this other guy that I was really drawn to. And I broke up with who's now my husband, and went out with this other guy for 9 months. And the whole time, it was like I was having nightmares about being strangled. If anybody would come put their hands on my shoulders, it was just intense, like almost panicky. And then I eventually thought this guy was controlling, and I broke up with him and went back with my husband. And then later I got curious about trying past life regression because I was a fan of Brian Weiss, and it totally made sense to me. And I went to this woman that lives close to where I do, and I was really uncomfortable with her. And the waiting room had little dolls with those blinking eyes staring, and it was really kind of, ugh. And I barely got under, and the whole time I was thinking, I'm making this up. This is stupid. I'm not under, which is
Right.
typical. So I didn't know, and I saw just a little bit of a place where the wood floors were like really worn, like weathered, and there wasn't much furniture, and that's about all I saw. Then I took a class, and we do little short regressions, and 3 times I went to the same lifetime, and I kind of put it together. And basically, I was like 15 in that life or younger, and I was pregnant by a church person. I just saw this guy older with red robes on, felt kind of Catholic or something, or Orthodox. And it seemed to be somewhere like in Switzerland, like Alpine, and I felt like it's maybe 1500s in that range. And I think my mom, who's my same mom now, noticed that I was, and she married me off to this guy that was kind of a catch. He was younger, had land, had a house, had animals, and he was just really abusive and jealous. And I saw myself getting yanked up the stairs, and at one point I saw the church guy, like at dinner. He was at the end of the table, and I was serving, and then the husband was there. And then this son, who was, probably the product of that guy, and he couldn't admit that he was the one. And I think the husband always suspected. And then finally, when the son was about 11 or 12, I just saw myself upstairs in that same room with the worn floors, just getting strangled to death. That was it, the end. And I floated out, and
And this was you experienced this under regression?
Yeah, in
Okay.
hypnosis.
Okay.
And it took a while to piece it together. And afterwards, I kept having all these revelations. Like, I knew that the guy that strangled me to death was the guy that I dated. I broke up with my husband, dated. My husband was my son in that lifetime. I've been married to him in others, but he was my son. So the phobia came on right before I met them. And all the health issues I brought in with me. So
That's incredible. And then we're going to get into details. I want to get into some details with some of the elements of past lives and the whole idea of reincarnation,
Sure.
specifically soulmates, soul groups. But the basic premise of this is that we have several lives. So our spirits, our souls, live a lifetime, but then we come back into another lifetime and another lifetime and another lifetime, for a certain period of time, or until we reach nirvana, or we get to where we need to be spiritually. And this is right. And I'm asking you, really, this is the basis of reincarnation, correct? Is that we come back and we come back to learn lessons?
Yeah, I think we choose it. We choose who we're going to interact with, and people that'll, set up the circumstances that'll, freak us out, torment us. you know, whatever it is we want to grow in. And usually you pick your parents out first, and, you know, they challenge you, and then you might marry it, and, you know, or have friends, or it just depends on what your, you know, your thing is.
Right.
And then you eventually kind of understand your part in it. And, you know, and then that heals, and then you know it. Like when you're out of body, things are pretty easy to understand. And I think we have grasp of a lot more than when we come down into a body. You know, it's like things are stepped down. There's a limited portal of what we can pick up on. And in a way, it's good because you can't cheat on the test. You know, you don't know what it is you're working at.
For what about people, though, that are less open-minded as far as I know a lot of people in this lifetime that are living this lifetime with no earthly clue that they've lived other lifetimes or might come back again, or even and don't believe it at all. Is that a wasted lifetime, or is that just part of the process?
No, you know, honestly, you probably don't have to know that. It helps if you're having a big problem, because you can actually go in and find out information that can help you put the pieces together. But there's lots of people that live just fine, and they're just plugging along, and they'll get the lesson anyways. It just may be a little harder. You know, it may take them a while longer, because even like one of the things I got about myself is that I didn't even know, you know, this hit me more later, but part of mine was standing up to people. And so I pick a career that's male dominated, and I started at a time when there weren't a lot of women in there, if any, and they didn't particularly want women in there. And I'm doing land surveying and engineering design and things, and I always had an insecurity because that's not what the degree I was going for. So, but I could just do it. I could think three-dimensionally, and it just came to me easy. And it was right when computer graphics were getting going. There weren't PCs yet, so you'd type out the commands, and it would go draw a picture, and you'd change the sheet. But I would always get this one person, that usually a boss, that would be very critical, and it would just hit my insecurity, and I'd work harder, I'd get ticked off, I'd fight with them, I'd take classes, I'd eventually quit, get another job, and then I'd be doing great, and then there'd be this one boss that would come out of the woodwork, same thing, and this kind of kept repeating, and I kept just changing, and I was making the same money the engineers were, and really most people loved what I did and thought I did a great job. And so finally at the last place I was at, there was this like little short Asian engineer, and I thought I was gonna have to kill him. I mean, I was just so frustrated, and he was very demeaning, and I was learning to do hillside drainage, and it was a new calculation program, and I was doing all the system networking, and he would try to tell me how to do that, and I would just be like, ugh. And he'd say like, oh, any moron could do that about the design work, and it would just get up on my hackles. And I remember just going, why? Like, why does this happen? And, you know, the common denominator, of course, was me. And I got this big wave of, why do you believe him? And I remember just kind of going, huh, why do I believe him? And I was like, you know what you're doing? I'm like, I do know what I'm doing. And it hit me that I was having this insecurity that was echoing out, that I needed approval or validation that I was good enough, even though I didn't have the degree. And I would attract the person that would tell me it wasn't, because they didn't want to, you know, it's like I was giving up my power, and they didn't want to give that to me. And so all that frustration, anger, I actually was creating. And once I got that, it stopped. It really diminished. And then it was like weirdly pretty shortly after that I put out this thought that I want to work at home when I retire. And then they asked me to work at home, and I was kind of pissed off because I was doing the computer stuff, and I thought, well, they're trying to freeze me out. And then I had this thought, you know, eventually like, oh, I'm working at home. That's weird. And and then I started doing the readings. And so it was like, once I got that, it was almost like I got pushed out into the next life path. So you can get them without doing the regressions, but sometimes they help when you feel stuck or
Right.
you have a physical problem that's not getting better with doctors, that sort of thing.
Because you can also, it could be a flashback or maybe a deja vu.
Yeah. And the deja vus can be like a marker that you're in the right place or you're right where you need to be. Kind of like a reminder, like, you know this and, you know, good. So, yeah, it's interesting how it comes to people.
So, well, tell us a little bit about your training with Brian Weiss. What was that like?
It was great. You know, I got my hypnotherapy certification training with a local guy, and then I took the training with Brian Weiss in Austin, Texas, and you know, and just they had different techniques, different styles. The guy that I trained with for hypnotherapy, and I also took past life regression with him as well, he kind of reminded me of like a used car salesman or something. Not sure he really in it or, you know, but his dad was, and he was really good at it. But Brian Weiss is just like Mr. Rogers. I mean, he's just like super, just amazing person. And he was Harvard trained, left-brained, you know, didn't believe in the whole thing. And his first client that went to a past life, she didn't either. So they both were stuck with this thing that 2 years they tried to use traditional psychiatry. She didn't get better. Then they happen into a past life, and then she's a lot better. And so he just said, you know, he kind of went with it because it seemed to have therapeutic value and really did help people. And I know, like with me, it totally helped me get over my phobia. And the phobia, the anxieties, phobias, pains, things people carry in their body is like a communication of something you need to pay attention to or wake up to. So it really kind of cemented that in and helped me learn how to, you know, that it's not so much what I'm doing. I'm just sort of facilitating it for the person, you know, so they can find what they need to know. But yeah, it was really amazing. I feel very fortunate that I got to train with him.
Yeah, that's great. I remember reading that book a long time ago, and it really changed me from the standpoint of just the opening your mind to that kind of possibility. And because I think everyone during their lifetime, for me, it's being drawn to a certain place, and I think that's so intuitively. If people were more followed their intuition more, like, why am I so drawn to Canada? Right? Or why am I so drawn to Egypt? Or why have I always wanted to go to Peru? Or, you know, it could be anything. Or, you know, why do I love food so much or love to cook? Or, you know, one of the things you mentioned earlier that I find incredibly fascinating is the idea of the souls tend to go through lifetimes together. So
Yeah.
the whole idea of not only soulmates, but soul groups, where there's a group of souls that tend to act out different parts, and what blows people's minds is that, well, my son in this life could have been my father in my last life.
Right.
And when you think about that's intense. I mean, that's for people to try to wrap their heads around that. What have you found? Is that the case with soul groups and soulmates? You hear a lot about, but what about soul groups? Is that true?
Yeah, it totally is. There's you know, kind of like the core members, and then there's the bit players, you know, that, and you know, things can become, you know, like people can join in your group at certain points, but you know, the thing you'll notice is when you meet people, or like sometimes when people have their children or they meet their spouse, there's this weird familiar feeling. You know, like somebody else could be drop dead gorgeous, and yeah, you know, you might be attracted to them physically, but there's something just not there. But then you'll meet somebody that's, you know, from other lifetimes, and they're just like, you can't stop thinking about them. They're just weirdly in your head, and you just feel really familiar. And like in my case, it was the guy that strangled me to death. So
well, that's what for better or worse, right? So the familiarity, and he could have been the greatest person in 4 lifetimes ago, could have saved your life 50 times, but in that particular lifetime, he strangled you to death. Or, then maybe he was a she in another.
right.
And even though he strangled, he killed you, your physical body, you're attracted to him in this lifetime, and you almost weren't with your husband because of him, right? So there's a thing there. Do you think, was he aware at all? Did he have any clue whatsoever that perhaps you had shared a past life?
Probably not. And the funny thing was, it wasn't that I wasn't drawn to my husband. It was just, this felt more compelling to me. And I really analyzed it afterwards, because I thought that was so weird. Like, what was I thinking? At least he didn't kill me. But he was part of my thing about standing up for myself, too. And I wasn't able to in that lifetime. And I was also probably maybe he needed standing up to or something. So it was like pulling me in to work out karma and to try to, do better with it. And sometimes people really botch it up and they just go the other way, and then they kind of add to it, and sometimes they, it clicks and they get it. But if it were super easy, we'd all be, just no challenge at all in our life. And
right.
So a lot of people, I noticed too, tend to meet and marry someone or have a girlfriend or boyfriend that's that very familiar, but they were probably like their brother or their cousin, initially. And then there's just something not there. Or they'll be attracted to the person like I was that, really they had a horrible time with. And then they get that over with, and then they kind of move on to the, someone that you're very compatible with, or you've had a good life with.
Right.
You're working on a joint challenge or something.
Right.
So that's kind of the pull.
Yeah, you always wonder sometimes why during your lifetime, and you see it with friends and other people, like, well, why were you ever in that relationship? It was such a challenge for you. It was so wrong in every way. It was codependency. It was this. It was that. There was an attraction there. There was definitely something there, but it was more of a challenge than anything. Most relationships are a challenge anyway. So it kind of fits into that paradigm of, well, it's supposed to be. Right? I mean, I have so many questions that come out of this. So then it brings me to soulmate. Where does that fit into it? And soulmates, I tend to think it's soulmates, but
it is.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's more than one person that you're, vibrate well with, and that you're meant to walk down that path with. And sometimes just for a while, and then you kind of get that done, and you have your kids, and then there's somebody else, So it's not like set in stone. And I know from like a religious standpoint that sounds horrible, but a lot of this doesn't have to do much with religion. It's just kind of is.
And see, that's such a great segue, because my next question was, in Eastern, so you have Buddhism and you have Hinduism, where that's a fact. Reincarnation is a part of that, right? But certainly in Christianity and Judaism, that is not at all. But again, these are religions, man-made religions. Does your religion, or do you find this in patients, that their religion affects their ability to A, tap into it, and certainly B, believe it?
It really doesn't. I mean, I've worked with police officers, engineers, medical doctors, and sometimes the technical people are a little more resistant because they don't want to feel out of control. But like the religion, like I've had a Muslim woman that saw Jesus when she was under, and it wasn't in a lifetime. It was just, like she had this big experience, and she was kind of nervous to go home, and she didn't want to tell her husband because, that would, but she felt like she had converted, which that's pretty unusual, but that happened. I've had people that are just curious, but they kind of, they're worried about it being in conflict, but they're also having phobia or panic attacks, and they want to get to the bottom of it. And so, you can always file it in the, maybe that's not really what it is. Maybe it's not a past life. Maybe it's just psychological category, if that makes you feel better. But whatever it is, I think it's past lives. And I mean, you can, in cases, check it back and find, the place it is or who you were. And some of them are so vivid and intense, It's just, I had one guy, he was having this feeling, he was a mechanical engineer, and he was having this really like longing feeling that he was like waiting for someone. He also had this same recurring dream about, and I usually ask people about phobias, recurring dreams, that kind of thing. So sometimes there's clues in them, about the same crescent beach and staring down at it from a bluff and different things happening. And then he had this terrible phobia about riding in the carpool, and he stopped riding. He could only ride with himself with the seat belt and the carpoolers around him. And so the first lifetime he went into a life where he was a little girl, and he was really struggling. It's funny because he was Asian, but he was just no. And I had him look at a picture of himself, and he was a little blonde girl with a hair lip, and he kept saying, I'm hideous. And he was given away at birth, and it seemed to be in Victorian England, and whose now his mother was the headmistress, and his niece was his mother. His dad was his dad now, that gave him away at birth because they thought he was disgusting. And then he flashed to a scene where there was this man standing in front of him with a striped apron on and black glasses and a black cap, and all the kids were around, and he seemed to be tied to the chair, and then he cut his lip. And he was trying to fix it, but he just panicked. And then he saw himself afterwards, and it was stitched back together. So he realized he was trying to help him. But that just lodged in his mind. So when he's in the carpool, all of a sudden he's strapped in, there's people around, and he just started feeling like jumping out of the car. He didn't know why. And then this longing thing, we went to another lifetime, and it was funny, he almost picked up a Scottish brogue. And he was, on this bluff, there was a lighthouse, and I asked him where it was, and he kept saying, it's Scotland. And I said, well, is there a county or a city in Scotland? He, like I was being a dummy. And then he could see this crescent beach down there, and he's like, oh, that's that beach. And then I had him move forward, and all of a sudden he saw himself down, a bunch of men had dug a trench, and there was an English ship out in the bay, and it had cannons, and they knew they were going to have to fight, and they didn't have a lot of weapons, and there were just boats of these Englishmen coming on shore. And then he started shushing me, because he's afraid they'd hear him, talking, and they'd hear us. And I said, it's okay, they can't hear us. And he said, I'm a coward, and they didn't fight. The English came out and just stabbed him, and he got cut, but he didn't die. And most of them died. Then they went up, burned the houses, and killed his family, killed a lot of the people. And so he was left, and his wife and children had been killed. And he was trying to take care of this lighthouse. He saw himself getting older, and he had a little picture of her in a frame. And he would hold it by the window and move it along so he could pretend she was outside. And he actually had that dream of a woman walking by the window. And that was where all this weird longing came. It probably hit him about the time that she died in that lifetime. So then I was like, okay. So once it moves up into conscious, then it clears, and then you're free to go. So, that's fascinating how it works.
It is fascinating. And when I was regressed once, it was about, oh boy, probably about 16 years ago. Okay. My issue with it was I got into a relaxed state, but I had never been. I don't know what being hypnotized feels like. So in other words, am I just relaxed or am I really gone? I'm like, so I knew I wasn't gone. I knew that I was still aware. I was very relaxed. And then I described, well, like it was an ancient American scenario in the Southwest with the Anasazi, and almost like that I was a cliff dweller. But here's it made sense from the standpoint that I'm extremely attracted to the Southwest United States, in particular New Mexico. But at the same time, I know I'm attracted to that, right? So, and I'm sure this is where it gets complicated. Am I relaxed and just conveying what I, not on purpose, but just feel like what I would be or would like to have been, or and then, you know, even though I'm really seeing it vividly or clearly, where's the verification, not only for you but for me, right? So I come out of it and I'm like, well, how do I know that's how I really want to know that that's true, right? Because I can dig further, but how could you ever know, like, and how can you tell the difference between someone who's just really, what tends to happen to people when they're regressed from the standpoint of how are they hypnotized, and how do you know that this person is really reliving another life?
Yeah, I get that because I did the same thing. I just thought, you know, because the weird thing is it's relaxed, focused concentration. So you're actually conscious, and most people don't know that. They think they're going to be a zombie. And there's a show on right now with this man that's hypnotizing people into past lives, and they don't remember it, which I think is a little weird, because to me, I give a lot of suggestion because I want people to remember it so that they get it into their conscious mind, because there's a really great opportunity for healing. A lot of times just remembering it really helps.
Right.
But I ask for dates, I ask for names, I ask for cities, that type of thing. And a lot of times people know, a lot of times they don't know. And, you know, people can go back and find, you know, the evidence. But there is a doctor, Ian Stevenson, that's passed away quite a while ago, but he studied thousands of cases and with kids that just remembered. And he checked them out, and they found proof. And the one that always sticks with me is this man, well, he was a kid, about 6, and he'd been talking about this past life. He knew his name, he knew his family's name, and he had marks on his body that he said he got stabbed. His friend killed him. And he was actually missing the ends of his fingers. He was born with that. And they tracked down this family like 40 miles away, and I think he was in India. So that was like a long way because they had no way to get there but walk. And so they'd never been there. So they took him to meet the family, and he's like, oh, there's my wife. And he knew everybody, knew everything about it. And then they found the autopsy photos because her husband had been murdered, and the marks corresponded with the autopsy photos, and the guy's fingers had been chopped off. And so there's those correlations. And I actually have a birth back here that correlates to another past life.
See, that's so funny, because I was just going to mention Ian Stevenson. I read, he has several books, and he did pass away. His research is amazing. For those of you who don't know, he's traveled all over the world, and specifically India. And I read one of his books, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it was all about his research and these cases in India. And what's amazing about it is that, so they talk about the best scientific proof meaning by using the scientific method of reincarnation, right? So he would document a child's statement about the past life. Then he would identify the deceased person's life that matched the child's memory. Mm-hmm. And then he would verify the facts of the deceased person's life that matched the child's memory. And again, like you said, he matched birthmarks and wounds and scars on the deceased, right? And they were verified by medical records. So and a lot of people say this is the best scientific proof of reincarnation to date. I was going to ask you what you thought of that, but obviously you know about him and his work, but that is really compelling.
Yeah.
Really compelling, because you're right. You're talking about people who never leave their village their entire lives.
Right.
And also it's India, so it's a situation where it's part of their belief system, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's you're taking someone who could never know this, right? Mm-hmm. So I guess my question to you then is, because some people always talk about a universal consciousness, the Akashic records. So in other words, we can pick up, if we tap into a universal consciousness, that we'll know everything. We're all knowing. So we could pick up on any life. So in other words, which is just as fascinating, but again, how do you know, like, is it a question of are these kids tapping into this universal consciousness where they're picking up on that? And again, I tend to believe it's more reincarnation, because there's so many elements to these cases that are so specific. But I'm sure you've heard that though before. The Akashic records had. I think as a person who's trying to study this and trying to learn more about reincarnation, it's so fascinating, and there are so many things about it that are so compelling, tough to prove, and the only reason I mention that at all is because science demands proof. Science demands this. Science demands that strict scientific method. I think Ian Stevenson did a lot towards that. Right? Right. I don't know. I don't think there's any way we could ever know for sure in our bodily forms the truth about it.
Yeah, well, right? It's true, and I think the collective unconscious, the Akashic records, the morphic resonance, all of that. It's possible that that's what it is. I don't think it is, but that is possible. But then, if that is what's happening, then usually it's in response to the child having a problem that can help, or the person having a problem that maybe remembering that lifetime can help. I think about Rupert Sheldrake, which I really like him, his work. And he talked about if you had a 1-inch net and you were fishing, had the weed 1 inch, you would sift it through, looking for what's in the ocean, and you would think everything was 1 inch or larger in there. But that's not true. But that's the best tool you have. And science demands proof, but they have this weird thing going where if they don't have the methods or the tools to capture it, then they say it doesn't exist. But there's so much that is beyond capturing the science. And left brain people, that makes them feel better. I mean, my husband's a chemical engineer, and he was very skeptical for a long time. He's kind of gone down the rabbit hole now, but usually it takes like a grandma standing in your room, have a weird intuitive thing, and then all of a sudden, or you've seen a UFO. And there's a lot of engineers that come to MUFON to hear the lectures or CERO, and they have that whole scientific technical background, but something's happened that's out of the paradigm. So it's okay. I get that. I'm compassionate towards it, because usually it's stemmed out of fear or this sense of wanting to control their environment. And it's uncontrollable. There's just way more to it than what we can perceive.
Well, science, the definition of science is that it validates or studies the physical world, right? So within a physical world, obviously there's a method you can use because it's physical, it's tangible, and they love to go into laboratories and they love to repeat, right? That something has to be repeatable, reproducible, and so ironic, because I just wrote a story about that and about ghosts, and it's like you can't. It's too much. It's too random and too elusive, and it's not the physical.
Yeah.
And it's also something that our science today, at this very moment, hasn't grasped yet.
Yeah.
Does that mean in 10 or 20 years that quantum physics or cosmology won't better understand energy, matter, and consciousness? There's no question that eventually this is all going to be it won't be paranormal anymore. It'll be normal.
Right, right. And we actually have moved that direction a lot. And, just the anecdotal stuff, sometimes, you think, well, why is it that 80 people that have stayed there have seen this apparition, or how is it that children, I'm sure people maybe seen that show, The Ghost Inside My Child, and they actually contact me for cases. And you see these kids just spontaneously talking about, their life. And I remember in the Brian Weiss training, this one woman, she was a newscaster in Texas. Her son started having nightmares. They had moved, and in cars, they're kind of that vibrating thing, how people put kids and drive their kids around so they go to sleep. It puts people in that alpha mode. That's why you can drive somewhere and not remember how you got there. That's the same wavelength as hypnosis. And all of a sudden he said about this little creek in the back, that's where I drowned. And she's like, you didn't drown, like, what are you talking about? And then he started recalling more as like a Native American lifetime. And the kid's 4. And so with
Right.
them, it's so close to the surface, a lot of times it can come out. But if you're with a parent that doesn't know what you're talking about or doesn't believe in it, they'll just say, oh, you're imagining that or something. And it'll...
Right, because parents, right, it's part of their paradigm and the way that they're already far away from where the source, right? And then they kind of dismiss it, and then that's how kids grow up to be adults and sometimes have dismissed it because they're afraid to talk about it. I always thought a movie I really love is Audrey Rose. From the 70s, late 70s, I think. And what I thought was phenomenal about that was, of course, that was an extreme case. But the whole idea for our listeners from that movie is that a little girl had been reincarnated to a family, but she reincarnated too quickly. She literally... what wound up happening in her past life is that she died in a car accident, burned inside the car, was on fire. It was very, very obviously intensely emotional and horrifying. She immediately reincarnated, and because she immediately reincarnated, her soul didn't have time to rest. Her soul didn't have time to take stock of what had happened, and she started to have extremely horrifying nightmares, violent. And it turns, and what happens in the movie is that Anthony Hopkins plays her father in her previous life, and he somehow knows that she's his daughter that just died. And I forget the details of how he found that out. I think it might. I can't remember. But and what they did, and this is more Hollywood at the end, what they wanted to regress her. In front of all these scientists and doctors because they were fighting over custody. The little girl actually wanted to be with Anthony Hopkins because that was her dad, right? So the other parents were horrified, right? They were, how could, the mom was of course more open-minded. The dad was ridiculously closed-minded, typical stuff. But she literally, and this is probably never happened before, but this was extreme. But at the end, Audrey Rose, literally from reliving the entire event through regression, actually dies again, as if she was actually died in the car. Wow. But again, you come away from a movie like that with so many questions, and it's fascinating, right? It's very compelling, and you're like, oh my God, imagine if, right? What if, blah, 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 what? And then you start to, what if that's why I'm afraid of water? I always think that, in a past lifetime I was eaten by a shark but again, a lot of people are horrified of sharks. But the whole idea of me being in treading water where I can't touch the bottom of the ocean is horrifying to me. So then I think to myself, I'm also a creative person, so my mind works that way. So I'm thinking, well, maybe I was on one of those Navy ships in World War II that sunk, and I was in the water for 2 weeks, and me and all my buddies were eaten by sharks. Like, yeah, not that happened, but you start to think that. You start to think, well, maybe that's, that there's a reason for everything. There's a reason why I love this and I hate this, right?
They're really, seriously, it's when you start looking at them, it's like things start making sense. It's more of like that kind of like, oh. And it's funny, I have the same thought. I don't know for a fact, but I have had a couple clients that have had lifetimes like that. And you do, if that's the thing you're working on, it'll be so intense that it'll affect your life. And it fascinates me how many strange ways it can show up. And, and people sometimes are kind of surprised. And I know I have a girlfriend that's back would bother her every, around the holidays. And it would happen when she was kind of annoyed with her mother. And we did hypnosis, saw that in that lifetime she was given away at birth, because she wasn't a girl, she was a boy, raised by this other man and his sisters. And this ox had appeared to break her back, and she floated up, and, and that I was confused, because I thought maybe her mom gave her away at birth, or she was the other man. And it came from, because I work with people, like pulling their guides or their masters, their higher self, to process it. And it was this message of, well, your mom might have her irritating moments, but she loves you. And you're lucky that you had loving parents in this lifetime. So the back was trying to remind her. Once she got that, then it was good. And that's the interesting thing. It's like a message. And, if sometimes the way you died, if it's pretty gruesome or something, that, like with the strangling for me, I realized later I died thinking, I don't trust men, I'm not getting married, I'm not having kids. And honest to gosh, I just never thought about it. I mean, I was not going to get married. I didn't marry my husband for 10 years. And, poor guy.
I was going to say, poor guy. You broke up with him to go with the guy who strangled you?
Yeah, I just wasn't into getting married, and I mean, it's funny, but then I never did have kids, and I didn't know that's why, but that was why. I was like finishing out that karma and trying to get straight, and I picked up a few other lessons in the meantime. And if somebody's had a really traumatic lifetime, most people don't come right back in, although I did a group regression for some women that there's two sisters, a mom and a friend. And one of the sisters, she was her uncle that got killed on a bicycle. And she knew everything about his life. And so she came back into her mother, and I thought that was fascinating. But she knew everything about this uncle. And she knew things that I guess, they just stopped talking about it, I suppose. But I don't run into that very commonly. That's pretty unusual.
That is unusual. That's incredible.
Yeah. There's certain things you do hear over and over, like from this person and that person, that have no connection, and yet something will come up, and I'll think, oh, they were in that same time period, or it's interesting.
Interesting. You mentioned recurring dreams, and there's so many elements to this, right? I mean, we could talk for 5 hours, but I do want to mention this. Recurring dreams, because I'm kind of like a lucid dreamer, and I know other people who are like that. But I have recurring dreams, and one of my recurring dreams, I'm just using this as an example because I don't know what it means, but it's the place I'm in. I am in either turn of the century New York or even earlier than that. No question about it. And I am always looking for someone. I never find them. But so many of the details of the buildings, it's like it's all laid out. It's hard for me to describe in words, but the buildings are all the world is there. The world I created, that world is all there for me.
Yeah.
And I wonder, I think to myself sometimes, I tell everyone about it, and I say, I really think I had a lifetime there. There's something about it. And again, it's some of those places, and you have some dreams that you're in a place, recurring dream. It's no place that you've ever recognized before. So it's a place,
Mm-hmm.
but no place you've ever been to in this lifetime. So and then one day, 10 years from now, am I going to be somewhere and be like, this is the place. This is the place that I've been to in my dreams 100 times.
Yeah, that definitely happens to people. I mean, I have somebody that had an experience like that going to London, and then they remember, when we did the regression, there was a whole lifetime there. Another person, 2 lifetimes in Russia, and got dread being in that, the square. So I wouldn't be at all surprised. And a lot of times when people are doing out of body, which, my grandmother did a lot, I've done some, and I know lots of people that do it. I kind of learned this in Preston by talking to Preston Dennett. It's really interesting. And a lot of times you go back to the first place you lived in, but I don't see why you couldn't go back to a lifetime that was important to you, and start there, and then run scenarios. And also there's kind of like meetup places people have out of body, like, and it's funny when you talk to different contactees, because a lot of times we'll meet up and it'll look like, they call them conference dreams, but it'll sort of look like a conference or for me sometimes it looks sort of like a cocktail party or something, but you'll see people there and it's kind of, and to me, I don't know if that's like out of body, what it is. There's people that would interpret, oh, you're on a craft, I don't know, maybe, but there's such a blend over with the two. And but when you're out of body is when you're more connected in. You're still attached, but you have more freedom to move about the planet and the consciousness and everything. So I'm suspecting that there's some unfinished business there, that you're trying to resolve. And
right. And they're always good dreams. They're never nightmares. I always wake up feeling A, very rested, and B, I could be there all day. In other words, I'm awake now and I'm going about my day, but there's a part of me that can't shake the dream. So I remember it so vividly, and it almost feels like a part of me is still there all day.
Well, it's interesting when you connect with people that have passed over in dreams, or you have, like, say, communication from a guide or, one of your masters or something. There's this really weird, vivid quality to it, and it is different than a typical dream. So it definitely sounds like there's something going on for you there.
Yeah.
And what's weird is in hypnosis, it's kind of like the Wild West in a weird way, because whatever your thing is, that's what you'll go to. I've had 2 separate clients go to this crystal city, and it seemed to have like a hierarchy, sort of like, like king and queen, but it's all very idyllic, and I think it's like a resting place, but they described very similar things. People that go out of body, like I said, they'll describe, these similar places. So I suspect that, it's just, we all have, kind of like Robert Monroe was talking about in Journeys Out of the Body, like these, like, kind of creations that are coming from us where we're comfortable or we've spent time and we can connect up there. So yeah, you've been to New York lately, or have you never?
I was born in New York, and my grandparents were, they came in through Ellis Island, Italian immigrants, great-grandparents. So I was born and raised. I moved to Florida when I was 13, but the New York I go back to is an older New York.
Wow.
But intuitively I know it's New York. So it's at one time I felt like I went back to almost went back to like it was New Amsterdam. So like the
Mhm.
1600s, right? The 1600s, where you can't even imagine what New Amsterdam. And what happened was, it was such a vivid dream, and I had it several times, that I researched. I got an old map of New Amsterdam and tried to look at what it looked like, and it resonated with me, because it was just nothing like, obviously, nothing like Manhattan now.
Yeah.
And it was just these. It was almost like these little houses, wooden houses, and pigs, and this was the 1600s, but it was New Amsterdam. So I don't know if I'm continually drawn back there lifetimes, or, and it's not even a place I would choose to live now. So it's not like I'm longing to live in New York. It's absolutely not. So it's not like I just long to live in New York. I'm glad I don't want to live in New York, right? So you have to wonder, why am I having these, you know?
Well, it feels like, that you have lived lifetimes there that were good or productive, that, so it attracts you. And, it's interesting because, when you're asleep, because you can do it consciously, like remote viewing, you can go back in time, you can go forward. You may be, just sort of traveling back and interacting there more than a memory. And I think about, like I've been at night, I'll do healings for people that, are sick or something, or clients, and I'll just send energy. And I scared myself astral projecting one time when I was younger in high school, and I trying to swim back in, and scared myself. And so I haven't done it consciously, but I know I do it. And so I had a number of people tell me like they woke up and I was there, like they saw me there. And I know one time it was somebody that was in prison, like she got put in prison. I felt bad. I was just sitting healing, and she saw me twice in her jail cell, at night. And she came in to tell me because she was kind of weirded out about it. And another time my husband was having a health complication, and my office, I drive right by the hospital, and I was seeing clients that I knew were kind of nervous, and I felt this fear feeling. So I sent healing, asking for guides and help, and then I got there and they were a little lost, and then I talked him in, and then right after that, I got a call from the hospital that he was having an episode. And so I had them close the office, hauled over there, and he was gone. So I thought, oh no, what happened? And then they brought him back, and he told me that he felt like he was starting to have a stroke, and he woke up, couldn't talk, and this nurse came in the room, and her name was something Yee. And then this other guy I used to work with named David Yee, I'm curious if he's passed away, were in the room, and he was trying to tell them he was having a stroke and he couldn't talk. And then he said, I came in the room and I looked around, I realized what was happening, and I said, I'm going to go get help. I took off and they took off. And then the doctor came in and he tried to tell him, and he looked really scared, took off, and then he'd hit the call button somehow, and they said, can I help you? And he said, no, the nurse has been here and my wife's getting help. And then by then the doctor had popped back in, and he kind of looked out the door and he goes, your wife's not here. And he looked at the clock and he knew I'd had an appointment at that time. So then I got over there. So he was just like, kind of like, whoa. But the weird thing was that doctor never typically was there at that time of day. So I think that, it's like a form of bilocating, and there's that thought that you can even incarnate into two bodies at the same time. Like if you're like one of these super achievers or something.
Right.
And I do believe that there's a part of us that stays out. Some of us comes in, but there's a part that always stays out and connected with everything. So I think that feels more comfortable.
That's fascinating. It's such a wonderful, mysterious world, when I think if you open up to the possibilities and embrace it in a positive way. I think so often, obviously, the unknown, it just terrifies people, right? and a lot of people are so fearful, and because of, for whatever reason, they come into this life extremely fearful because of perhaps something that happened in another lifetime, or whatever the human nature as we know it today. It's tough, it's rough, and I love having these conversations. I want to ask you, what do you feel is the end game, if there even is an end game when it comes to reincarnation? Is it what they Hindus, I guess, call nirvana? It's like, I'm done, I don't need to come back anymore, and then do you become a higher, do you become like an angel or a guide, or how does that typically, or how does that supposedly work?
Well, I don't know if anybody can tell you for sure. There's a lot of people that will tell you they know, and I hear all the time, "Oh, I'm not coming back. This is it." And I'm thinking, yeah, maybe. It just depends on where you're at and how you're doing. But I do think, because I've had enough recalled lifetimes on other planets, they recall when they came in, and so I'm sure that what makes us up has had so many varied experiences, and it's like, because of the consciousness, we're interested in what makes other people tick, and that's why we tried different bodies, different religions, different skin colors, different ethnicities and places, and because it really helps us understand and round, and yet I think when we're not in physical form, where we feel fight or flight or fear or all of that, which kind of mucks things up sometimes. But I think we are more connected, more part of the whole. And, but I get a little irked, like when I go to Chapman and I speak to the classes and I show them spoon bending and psychokinesis and how to project your energy, and I'll hypnotize the room and do past life regressions. The thing I tell them is, I'll tell you my take on it, but if anybody tells you they know for certain, and even like within religions, they'll say like very dogmatically, and people fully embrace that, and that's good if that's where what resonates. But nobody has the full picture, and you're doing your best when you kind of put the pieces together in the way that makes sense to you.
Right. I completely agree, and I think that when people, again, you're right, dogma, it's it being so sure about one way or one thing. There's no way that, I don't think we're supposed to, in this form, in the physical world we live in now, we're not supposed to know, and I think that's part of the whole idea of people's journeys.
Right.
When you talk about people's journeys in a lifetime, and how, and I'll tell you what, soul groups, I think, tend to come together for journeys, projects. Yeah. There's no question about it. Lori, part of soul group, the people that we've become close to as a result of this journey and making a documentary, and then going further with this research, that's a soul group.
Yeah.
That's all part of, like you said, some are periphery, some are more nuclear, like main.
Something.
Exactly. And I just find that, like, I literally, Kim, I could talk to you for 5 hours about this, because there's so much I haven't asked you that I want to ask you. I do want to ask you a couple more questions, and I think maybe what we can do is we're going to run out of time after those questions, but maybe we can have you back on to talk. We'll talk beforehand and maybe talk about one thing specifically. So maybe we'll talk about recurring dreams, or maybe we can talk about the idea of soul groups, or this way we can get more into detail and we can tell some stories. I was hoping that you could tell some stories that I know you blog, and I've read a couple of your blog posts about some fascinating cases from people who are your clients. And I was hoping to get to it, but we're not going to get to that, but maybe that's something we can talk about next time.
Yeah, sure, I'd be glad to. It's you get me going on this, because it's so interesting to me too.
Right.
I know you got life and eat and all that too. So.
Right, and again, I just think that it's one of those areas of study. I say study, but some people study it, but it's just one of those fascinating phenomenon in life that we experience, part of the human experience, that that is as fascinating as anything else. As fascinating as alien extraterrestrial intelligence and interdimensional realities, alternate universes, alternate realities, and again, you can tie that all into dreams. Well, what if I'm dreaming about an alternate life? Again, you throw it out there, but you don't know because it's familiar, but it's not.
Yeah.
So it's to think about it, but I think the thing with the dreams is that it makes you, for me anyway, it puts me in such a balanced place when I have those dreams. I can come out of, when I have a really lucid dream and I remember everything, which I tend to do. Like, I can tell you about a dream I had 20 years ago and give you details. It doesn't go away. It doesn't fade.
Yeah.
So, but it always puts me in a good mood. It's always something that's very, I could say, good for the soul.
Yeah. Well, and when you think about it, that may be in a weird way your form of meditating. Because it's kind of a similar thing where you go somewhere that feels very, very familiar. And like, it's funny, that it popped into my mind of a client that I had recently, and he's very kind of not sure. I get some people come in like, oh, let's go, and other people are like, who is this woman? But he had this dream that this place he would go, and he said it was so real, and he had actually talked to another guy that does out of body that's written some books about it, and he knew the place. But he said everything's on a slant, and the buildings kind of come out and up. And then he said each one has a symbol on it, and when he looks at the symbols, he knows everything about the people that live in the house. And he said then there's always this one alien being that's kind of coppery looking that has a symbol on his forehead. And I told him just really look at it, remember it, and he drew it. And and then he got the interpretation of what the symbol meant. But he'd go there all the time, and basically they were trying to help him learn to calm down and not be so up in his head, to just sort of enjoy here and now. And I notice I get a lot of people, well, and you run into it with UFO crowd, but everywhere where there's a lot of worry about all this stuff that's way beyond your control. Just this is going to happen, that's going to happen, what about this, what about that? And some people do it like gossipy about people right around them. Some people do it about the world order or beyond that. And it's really fear-based, and it takes you away from what's right in front of you and what's your path. And, and it's, a lot of people sit around critiquing, talking about, witnessing, other people's stuff. But I really admire the people that get out there and just do it, test it. Take a risk, fail, win, but you're learning and you're really getting what you need to out of being here, and that's why you're here.
Right. No, that's great. What have you learned from your work, and how has that changed you?
I think it's really kind of helped me calm down, as far as I think I just had to get through that whole my life path, the work part. But now I just really get how connected we are, and how people get hung up on one or two things, and, how you can heal that, and you can just, shift it and then move into the fun, move into the great things, and really bring out what you're, why you're here. And there's a lot of people that sometimes, doing the hypnosis will bring up a skill or a talent, or it'll help them sort of realize why they're good at something. And, that's really kind of what I get out of it. And I get a thrill out of watching people connect the dots, and then the thing will lift off so they can move forward. It's great. I think that's what we all look for, and right. So it's fun to be a part of.
Must be very rewarding for you. Very rewarding. Yeah. Please tell our listeners how they can get in touch with you if they want to learn more, or do a session, or give us some information. And also, too, if you could briefly tell us about your role in Zero, and what you do there, what they do, and how all about that.
Oh, great. Yeah. Well, if people want to get in touch with me, my website is kimtrotman.com. It's just KIMTROTMAN.com. And I have, phone numbers and the address on there, and I'm in California. So regressions, I need people to be there. I've had people go, can you do it over Skype? And maybe, but I'm not comfortable with that. I'd rather have them there. But with readings, I do a lot of phone readings. I have clients that are all over the country, and we can definitely do over the phone or Skype or FaceTime. And I just occasionally do radio interviews. There's blogs on there, and I get pushed to write blogs, but it tortures me. But I need to write more. No, and
well, you have a lot to tell, so.
Yeah, I know. It's like if I could write as fast as I could talk, it might be easier. I'd have to get that Dragon software or something. But yeah, so I do that in an office in Newport Beach, and so that's fun. That's my my day gig, and then I got sucked into the UFO thing too, and I'm good friends with Yvonne Smith, and her group CERO is Close Encounter Resource Organization. That's been around over 20 years, and she works with abductees and post-traumatic stress and hypnosis, and these are where people can go and talk kind of in a private situation where they're not ridiculed, and with other people that get it and have had similar experiences. And then the CERO International, the website's www.CEROinternational.com. That's the public face of it, and so we can educate, support, the knowledge. And we worked with Dr. Roger Lear, who removed implants, and we're looking to find new, replacement. We do scanning for implants or, contact. There's a lot of, the implants will put off scalar waves. There's magnetic fields. There's the dyes, the handprints. So there's a lot of that you can check for, and we ideally want to categorize it and then start, having the information available so that, researchers can find similarities, because so many people have these big experiences and then know where to go with it. And honestly, people are trying to study it out of their own budgets. And so it's tricky. And so bringing the speakers to talk every other month, and hopefully we'll go once a month, helps support that, and donations and ticket sales. And on September 20th, we're having Grant Cameron, who's a Canadian researcher that's studied the abduction phenomena, and he's going to talk a lot about sort of the specific things he's noticed with abductees. And that's always at 7:30 on a Saturday, So that's coming up. We're excited about that.
That's
and then
great.
We've got a number of other guests coming, so you can check on the website who's coming. And
Perfect.
So that's basically it. One day I'll write a book, but I don't know when.
Well, I wish I lived closer. I always tell Lori Wagner that. I'm like, if I was closer, I'd come to every one of those meetings. But as it is right now, I can't make those. It's too far away. But I want to thank you for coming on, and I also want to thank you for the great work that you do. I think from a healing perspective of actually healing and helping other people, that the work you do is very important. And I think more and more people will realize this over time. Right, and I think that, and I think there is absolutely something profound about the idea of reincarnation and past lives and past life regression. But there's something there. There really is, and it's hard to ignore that. When you look at the amount of evidence and the amount of cases, and where you see the children, and certainly also adults, but specifically children who would have no way of knowing certain things. Or I liked when they start speaking different languages. How we didn't even get into that. That's just, if that isn't proof, then it's very close to proof. So, and again, I'm saying that in relation to what scientists like to think of as proof. But I think for every individual intuitively, they can figure that out on their own. But again, thank you for coming on, and definitely want to have you on again, because I'd really like to talk in more detail about specific things, and we could talk about what we want to talk about. But this was great. I've really enjoyed this, and again, I could go on for another hour and a half, but that's just way too long for our show. But
pleasure. Yeah, I enjoyed talking with you. It was, I could talk for hours too. It's just fascinating, and I think most people on some level are interested, but they're also nervous about it. I'm kind of way past that, way down the rabbit hole. So
yeah, exactly. So am I. So yeah, no, but that's good, and it's good to have these discussions, and I think what's important is to turn people on to the idea of it, even if they're beginning to go down that path. So if they happen to go on YouTube, they happen to come to our website, they go to your website, it's like, I'm going to read more about this. So they pick up an Ian Stevenson book, right? And the next thing you know, now they're really going down that rabbit hole, and they're like, you know what? It's enlightening, and the quest for knowledge is part of the whole reason for coming back, right? And realizing certain things, and no, it's good stuff. Well, thank you again, and again, we'll look forward to having you on again soon.
Sounds great. Take care.
Kim, you take care.